The United States crossing that 200,000 milestone, the death of Justice Ginsburg, and the fight to fill her seat, plus a decision in the Breonna Taylor case. We traveled here to Washington to speak with Vice President Pence, who, of course, also serves as the head of the coronavirus task force. So that's where we started, with the pandemic. So, Mr. Vice President, as you well know, yesterday was the grim milestone marking 200,000 Americans passing from COVID-19. No other country has suffered as many deaths as we have. We account for 20% of the death toll, yet only 4% of the world population. As head of the coronavirus task force, how do you explain that?
It's a heartbreaking milestone, and really our thoughts are with all of the families that have lost loved ones in the course of this pandemic. But Linsey, in all of my time working on the White House Coronavirus Task Force, I'm absolutely convinced that because of the decisive action of President Trump, because of the dedication of health officials at the state, federal level, our doctors and nurses and hospitals around the country, and because of the sacrifices the American people made, that we saved hundreds of thousands of lives that could have been lost in the midst of this pandemic.
So I want to show you a picture. I don't know how well you can see that, but this is a picture that President Trump tweeted out. You've probably seen it, the rally last night in Pennsylvania. Thousands of people packed closely together, hardly any social distancing, very few masks. As, again, head of the coronavirus task force, when your recommendation is for people, Americans, to stay away from large gatherings, how do you justify scenes like this?
Well, the recommendations of the coronavirus task force from early on have been state-specific. We've given our very best counsel to each individual state and many times to individual communities because the circumstances are very different from one state to another. We've trusted governors in our states, and most importantly, we've trusted the American people.
Well, certainly Americans have that right, but as Vice President and President, do you have the responsibility to not put Americans into harm's way? I mean, you said just a minute ago you were listening to the governors. The governor of Nevada urged the president not to have the indoor rally there, and he said that, quote, the president was putting countless lives in danger.
Well, we're in an election year, and not surprisingly, some politics is being played because in Nevada, that governor actually saw to it that the president was denied access to 3 or 4 different outdoor sites, which would have been our first choice.
But just one more on this, because you have Dr. Redfield, Dr. Fauci, the Surgeon General, all urging Americans to wear masks, to stay away from large gatherings. You had President Trump last night making fun of Joe Biden for social distancing and wearing a mask. Are you concerned at all about the optics that potentially you're putting your political aspirations above American lives, and also the misinformation?
So many issues of great importance in this election. President Trump and I are absolutely committed to carry this choice all across the country and continue to give the American people the best information to put their own health first. Encouraging people to wear masks, to practice good hygiene, social distancing where it's possible has been a continuous theme. But as I said, every state is different, and we're continuing to see real progress all across the country because the American people are demonstrating every single day that we can put the health of our families and our neighbors first. We can be opening our economy up again, and we can be having an election which I believe is one of the most important elections in the life of this nation.
So just to put a pin in that, when you see images like that, you're not concerned about those kind of large-scale gatherings?
President Trump and I trust the American people. We truly do believe in this freedom-loving nation, that the American people know how to look after themselves, look after their families, and look after their neighbors, and look after the future of this country as we move ever closer to Election Day.
So Monday night, when President Trump was at a rally in Ohio, he was talking to the crowd about coronavirus and said, quote, "It affects virtually nobody." He went on to say that the virus affects elderly people with heart conditions. Do you agree with this assessment by the president, or do you believe that potentially this is another example of him, as he says, playing down the virus?
Well, I've never heard the president to downplay the coronavirus. I've heard him speak confidently about the ability of the people of this country and officials at every level to meet this moment every step of the way. At the President's direction, we raised the infectious disease standards at every nursing home in America. We deployed all 8,000 of our inspectors to focus exclusively on infectious disease compliance. And in almost every state, we saw governors that really put the health of seniors first. There were states like New York that made decisions that sadly cost lives as they returned coronavirus patients back to nursing homes.
But as you know, 21% of those Americans are under 65 who have lost their lives to coronavirus, and 200,000 people have lost their lives. Is that virtually nobody?
Well, I think that what the president's made clear is that this is an infectious disease that has affected people all across the country. Nearly 7 million Americans have tested positive for the coronavirus. And some 200,000 Americans that we've lost is a heartbreak to each one of us. But we always want to give the American people the facts. And as Dr. Tony Fauci said not long ago, all along the way, everything that he told the president in the Oval Office, President Trump told the American people, and that'll continue to be our approach.
At a press briefing on September 16th, President Trump said the blue states had tremendous death rates. If you take the blue states out, we're at a level I don't think anybody in the world would be at. Taking the factual accuracy out of that for a moment, because according to the Washington Post, 53% of the deaths have been in blue states, 47% have been in red states, so nearly half. We're talking about 90,000 in red states. Do you think that it's appropriate for the president at this time to be talking in terms of red states and blue states when he's the president of the United States?
I think the president's approach here has always been to recognize that the success that we have been able to have to make sure that no American that ever required a ventilator was denied a ventilator, that hospitals had this capacity and the personal protective equipment and supplies, that we surged thousands of military medical personnel into the areas most impacted, is because we've taken a state-by-state approach, and that'll continue to be the approach we have in the future.
Let's turn now to the Supreme Court. You've said in the past with regard to Roe v. Wade that it should be thrown into the ash heap of history where it belongs if this nominee does get onto the court. Can you assure Americans that Roe v. Wade will be overturned?
Well, first, this week we will mourn as a nation a true public servant in the passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She led an inspiring life, and she was a tenacious advocate for her judicial philosophy, and we honor her service and mourn her passing. But now comes the time the president will have the duty under the Constitution of the United States to appoint a new justice to the Supreme Court. And this Saturday, I have every confidence that President Trump will introduce to the nation a woman who will bring a judicial philosophy in the tradition of Justice Antonin Scalia, to uphold the Constitution, to not legislate from the bench, to apply laws as written. And that's the approach that we're taking. And I know as the president goes through the process of making a decision, it'll be his focus entirely on choosing a woman who brings the background, the intellect, and the judicial philosophy that is consistent with justices the president has appointed and the more than 200 federal judges we've appointed to the courts.
It's been reported that Amy Coney Barrett is a top contender for the Supreme Court job. There has been some scrutiny from some about her alleged affiliation with a religious group, People of Praise in Indiana. Some people have suggested that they have practices that many Americans might find extreme. Do you feel that there's any concern that she would be able to potentially keep this covenant with the organization, at the same time serve the American people independently and objectively on the Supreme Court?
Judge Barrett is an extraordinary jurist. And she's among a number of women that are currently under consideration by the President of the United States. But I must tell you, the intolerance expressed during her last confirmation hearings about her Catholic faith, I really think was a disservice to the process and a disappointment to millions of Americans. Judge Barrett and other judges currently under consideration, we have every confidence are exactly the kind of jurists that the President has appointed from early in this administration.
Switching gears now, in a speech yesterday, you reiterated something you had said actually during the RNC as well. With regard to Joe Biden, you said Joe Biden says that America is systemically racist and that law enforcement in America has an implicit bias against minorities. You said it in a manner that sounded like you disagree with that. Is it your belief that a black man in America gets the same treatment as a white man in America by police?
President Trump and I believe the men and women who serve in law enforcement of every race and creed and color are some of the best people in this country. And we reject the notion from Joe Biden and others that there's an implicit bias toward minorities in law enforcement. That being said, when tragic circumstances happen, while some want to defund the police, as Joe Biden has actually advocated cutting funding to law enforcement, President Trump and I have been working with leaders in law enforcement at the state and local level to provide them more funding and more resources. We worked with Senator Tim Scott on Capitol Hill to develop legislation that would give all new resources to law enforcement, to improve public safety, to improve training and accountability. And that's why it's really unconscionable that the Democrats in the Senate actually blocked Senator Tim Scott's bill that would provide new resources to law enforcement.
What do you say to the protesters, specifically in the case of Breonna Taylor, who are saying things have to change, and particularly reacting to the statistic, which you've heard before, that a black person is 3 times more likely to be killed by police than a white person?
What happened to Breonna Taylor was a tragedy, and we're very confident that justice will be served.
Any message for the protesters?
What's heartbreaking to me is that the leading cause of death for African American men under the age of 44 is homicide. I mean, it is black families that are struggling and suffering under the scourge of violent crime in many of our major cities. It's why President Trump launched Operation Legend earlier this year, named after a little boy who was literally killed sleeping in his home. We're going to continue to work to advance that cause and remain very confident that when tragic circumstances arise, that justice will be served. But we have to have law and order on our streets, most especially for African American families and other families that call our major cities home.
Lastly, in the Bible, in Matthew chapter 12, verse 34, it says, "Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." Obviously, you would understand that it means if you want to determine where someone's heart is, you just listen to what they say. How do you square that with a president who frequently resorts to name-calling sleazebag losers and far worse?
President Donald Trump has a heart for the American people, like no president I've ever known. I see it in the way that he's worked every day to keep the promises he's made to the American people. When we took office, our military was hollowed out by years of reckless budget cuts. This president kept his word. The men and women of our armed forces, we rebuilt our military. We restored the arsenal of democracy, and in fact, passed the largest pay raise in more than 10 years. And I can tell you, as the father of a United States Marine, as the father-in-law of a Navy pilot, I couldn't be more proud to serve alongside a president who cares so deeply about the men and women of our armed forces, their families, and our veterans. This president said the forgotten men and women of America would be forgotten no more. And I truly do believe that's why you're going to see 4 more years of President Donald Trump in the White House, because the people that are rallying around our cause and have supported us every step of the way know with this president, this vice president, it's been promises made and promises kept.
Thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.